I'm very excited to introduce Pivot TV's first guest, Scott Brody. Scott
Hello.
started his tenure in entertainment in assistant roles. He found his way into the writer's room as a writer's assistant and script coordinator on shows like Workaholics, The X's, and Mr. Robinson. In 2017, he started working in podcasts and ended up as the head of podcasts at Sports Illustrated. After that, he got a certification in product management and founded a company with me called Prologue, which aims to make the process of creative development faster, fairer, and easier. Scott is currently product manager at Over the Top, a marketing company based out of Irvine, and concurrently he's pursuing his MBA at USC, slated to graduate in the spring, correct?
Yeah,
Uh,
that's right.
he lives in Irvine with his wife and two adorable kids. Did I miss anything, Scott? Is there anything that you would like to add to that intro?
No, that was solid, man. There's some other nuances and twists and turns along the way, and because of the nature of what this group is, I have like committed to myself that I'm going to be much more open and honest in terms of telling my story than I typically am in other settings. So,
Yeah.
um, so lucky for you all. But yeah, no, that was good. Good
Um,
quick overview.
Thank you. And Jana, I'm gonna stop your video and then bring you back later when with the question and
Great.
answer. So me and Scott. Um, Terrific. Um, so with that introduction out of the way, I guess briefly just walk us through your career in entertainment, where you started, how you got started. Yeah, start there. Oh, and
Uh,
as part of that, if you want to bounce in some ideas, tell us some things that you kind of loved about the experience and the stuff that wasn't so great about it.
about working in entertainment.
Correct.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I got started working. My first job in entertainment was at a uh, management and production company, and I actually started as an intern there. And then there's a funny story that I'll tell the short version of, which is basically that the uh, assistant to the president of the company um, uh, got fired for embezzling money over a period of like 3 years. He was cutting himself fake checks and doing other kinds of like credit card fraud, and he got fired on the last day of my internship, and they offered me his job, and I was like, I don't know how to do his job, but okay. and
Don't mention any names of companies or people. We'll
Yeah, and my boss literally said to me, you know what, as long as you don't steal money, you're going to be better than the last guy. So uh
um,
so yeah, so I did that for a few years, and then from there, uh, went on to start working in writers' rooms, and I was a writer's assistant, like you said, on Workaholics, um, and bounced around a bunch of different sitcoms, most of them bad and that you would have never heard of. But over the course of that time, I was a writer's assistant and showrunner's assistant, script coordinator, um, and um, did a little bit of like development assisting depending on when certain people I was working for were sort of in development or in production or whatever. Um, and I think like the magic for me in working in entertainment was always the really collaborative nature of the writers' room. Like that, like there was just nothing like the high of working in a writer's room, which it was also brutally hard at times and super boring at other times. And very, very frustrating to be an assistant in that setting. Um, when you have all these ideas and joke pitches that you're bursting with, and a lot of times people don't want to hear them. But uh, but at the times when like it was more open and more collaborative, and just like that whole just feeling of a group of people kind of coming together in a room for a common purpose, all kind of aimed at the same thing. Um, and like when that creative idea clicks and like you get over that hump, you get to that new thing, that sort of moment of discovery of like, oh hey, yeah, here's the thing that we were working toward, here's the thing that we were all trying to get at. That's kind of like a feeling that I did not think was going to be replicable anywhere else, but I have found that that was not true. So
Right. And
um sorry, go ahead. Do you want me to just keep going through the
well, I
saga?
mean, I would ask the flip side of it. What was kind of what were some more of the frustrating aspects of that part of the journey?
The frustrating thing for me, as I know is for a lot of people, is just your career advancement is very much not in your own hands in a lot of circumstances. And the film and TV business, in my experience, was very much not a meritocracy. People who were good at their jobs and worked hard did not get ahead, and people who were shitty human beings and not talented often did get ahead. And it just was based on sort of these seemingly random factors. Uh, and yeah, that was very frustrating. It was frustrating to be in a position where I was convinced that I was sort of this kind of, lower class citizen, and didn't have as much worth or value, um, and was kind of, chomping at the bit to be able to prove that value and have more responsibility and have more opportunity. But that was very hard to come by, and rare when it happened.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of answers my question of why you decided to change careers. Was it kind of that you felt that the lack of opportunity was outweighing the good of the experience of being in the writer's room?
I had always told myself from the moment that I like decided to move to California and work in TV that I would keep going as long as it felt like I was moving forward and progressing. And if I'm really being honest, when I look back at that period of time, I think that I had stopped moving forward for a while, and I didn't really recognize it. Um, I had been on I worked on a series of bad and frustrating shows, some of which you worked on too. And there was one particular moment where I was out of work and I'd been out of work for a while. And I'd formed a pretty good relationship with someone who had been a showrunner I'd worked with. And I remember calling them one afternoon in frustration. I don't even really remember what I was frustrated about in particular. I don't know, I'd probably gotten a rejection or gotten some dumb notes on something, or who knows. And I called them to vent, and I couldn't get a word in because this person who was a former boss and mentor of mine and seemingly had achieved everything that I was hoping to achieve just started venting to me about all of the same things that I was planning to vent about. And I just went, shit, this doesn't get better. Like, it never gets better. This guy is 40 years older than me, or I don't know how much older, but he was, some number of decades older than me. And um and still just as frustrated and still as cynical and still as, you know, as scared about the future and where his career was going and what was coming next. And I just was like, I don't want this to be what the rest of my life looks like, what the rest of my career looks like. Like, this isn't fun anymore. so,
Yeah.
so that's when I knew I needed to do something else.
So, I mean, I guess off of that, how did you arrive at the career path um, that I wanted to say that you have now, but you kind of did a bit of a two-step there. Is there how did you decide initially that first career change?
So yeah, when I really made the decision to like leave the entertainment business, two things happened at the same time. One, um, I started a business with my wife, who was sort of she was in the process of getting a kind of, calligraphy and custom stationery design business going. She'd been a graphic designer for a long time and had kind of discovered calligraphy and hand lettering, and then discovered that people wanted to buy some of the stuff she was making. And so it was like we could make a business out of this. And so I started handling more of the business stuff, and she was doing the creative stuff. And that felt really good as just like a like, total change of pace. And what ended up being like to a fault and like too much. I had a lot of control over my own destiny, right? I had like polar opposite of my experience in the entertainment business. Everything that I did mattered a lot, and was like whether or not we were able to pay the bills was like how hard the two of us were working and how effectively we were doing what we were setting out to do. At the same time, I started kind of making a foray into podcasting. I had some friends, who were working in radio, and after a couple of conversations with them and some people that they connected me with, I kind of realized like, yeah, there's a lot of the things that I like about film and TV are there in podcasting. This was the early days of podcasting. I mean, this was like first season serial era. Um, and So yeah, I think I took a class on like podcast writing to just kind of figure out like, okay, I know how to write, but how do I write for podcasts? How do I write for this kind of like audio first type of storytelling? Um, and From there was able to produce a piece that, through some good fortune and good connections, was able to get onto All Things Considered on NPR. And then I was kind of able to leverage. Actually, I wasn't able to leverage that until a bit later. I um, Eventually it was just like too much for both for our entire like family's household's income to be coming from like our one small business. It was too many ups and downs. It was too seasonal. So we decided we needed a second income, and I was like, I'm ready to go back and do something. And at that point, um, I was applying to a lot of different kinds of jobs, both TV and podcasting jobs, more like in the development world. And I got brought into A&E networks. This was a period of time where all the networks, all the studios, had like um, formed their own sort of like in-house digital studios to make digital content, and they didn't really know like what they were doing or why they were doing that, but that was a thing that they had decided to do. And so I got hired at the digital studio for A&E networks, and was hired kind of more to help with creative development and writing on some of their digital projects. And then the guy who hired me was fired like 3 weeks after he hired me, and my role was very much up in the air as to what I was going to do. And it was like I need to figure out how to show value. um, and there was this podcast project that I had heard about that was like happening kind of in our like team in our unit, and it had been mostly outsourced to a like person who had hosted her own podcast before. Um, it was like an adaptation of a true crime show that they were rebooting, and uh, and it was supposed to be like a thing that was happening in tandem. There was like the reboot of the TV show, and then there was the podcast, um, which is like very common nowadays. It's like that happens all the time, but that was back then. It was like, I don't know, there were only a handful of examples of that. Um, anyway, I heard the first cut of the first episode of the podcast, and I was like, this is absolutely terrible. I know I can do a better job than this. So I kind of just inserted myself. I was able to insert myself into the process, and I worked with the host, and I became the producer of that show. And the host ended up um, first hated me and then came to really like me. And that show ran for something like 300 episodes, long outlasting my stint at A&E. It was a huge hit show. And from basically the time that that first launched and was very successful, um, everyone in the network was like, who made this? This is really good. No one in the building has ever been able to do anything like this before. And so I became like the podcast guy at A&E, and started getting invited to a lot of really interesting meetings and meeting a lot of really interesting people, being exposed to a lot of parts of um, the business that I had ever been exposed to before. It was really interesting. Um, and um, from there was able to kind of parlay that experience into becoming the executive producer of podcasts for Sports Illustrated.
Um, that's fantastic. Do you, so what skills did you bring from your time in film and TV? Uh, which of those skills helped you in these kind of new roles and podcasts? Like what were the standout?
I leaned really heavily on my like storytelling knowledge and knowing how to break a story, right? That time spent in the writer's room, um, and just kind of knowing like this is what a good story feels like. This is how you construct it. You know, going through different using different like frameworks that I had learned, frankly, like the Dan Harmon story circle I leaned on a lot, and just kind of using that to try to construct podcast episodes in a way that was like this, we can use the same stuff to make this compelling.
Yeah.
Um, Also the technical skills of like I knew how to edit video. I did not know how to edit audio, but I learned pretty quickly how to edit audio, and it wasn't that much different than editing video. It just was without the video. So, you know, having that hard skill in my back pocket and being able to utilize it in a different setting, also really helped me. Um, and I never expected myself to be the most technically capable
Yeah.
audio producer, right? Like that wasn't my wheelhouse, but I knew what I was doing enough to be able to sort of leverage my other skills. And this is all the like first pivot. There's still the second pivot later.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a lot to get through. I wanted to rewind very briefly though, and go back to that moment where you were kind of considering moving on from TV. And I know it was more of like a graduated sort of like gradient into podcasts because there is that entertainment component. But I guess did you feel pressure, um, either internally or externally from other people, um, to either pivot or stay in television? Like where was that kind of like pressure balance for you?
um, I felt a lot of internal pressure. I felt a lot of pressure from a younger version of myself to, when I was like 20 years old and decided I wanted to work in TV. um, I had sort of formed certain ideas and made certain commitments to myself that, like, a decade later it was really hard to let go of, right? It was really hard to acknowledge that, like, hey, my worldview when I was just graduating from college was not the same as it is now. There are different things that are important to me, and also, like, I know a lot more about what this is in reality versus what it was in the sort of idealized version in my head, and that's okay. And there are sort of these like terms that people throw around, like, oh, they couldn't hack it or whatever, and a lot of that was in my head. And ultimately that's just not that useful, and it's also, I think, a defense mechanism that a lot of people use. And it's a very non-nuanced point of view. and ultimately
On the
like really
nose, on the
damaging.
nose, as writers would say.
Yeah, and it's also just like um I don't know, it's just not a useful or accurate way to ever look at things. Um and then again, just like honesty here, you know, I um had a very honest conversation with my wife. Like uh you know, I wanted to have kids. And she was basically like, we're not doing that while you're doing this. It's like, it's too up and down, it's too erratic. Like, there's too much volatility. And I had spent long periods of time being unemployed over the course of our relationship and our marriage. Like, she was like, if this is what you want to do with your life and your career, I totally support it, but we're not going to have kids while you're doing this. And I was like, that was hard to hear, but also it was fair.
Yeah.
Um, and, you know, it just kind of made me think and realize like what is actually important to me in my life and what I want my life to look like long term. Um,
Yeah. Um,
uh, and it wasn't like an ultimatum. It was just sort of like a recognition that like the things that need to be able to be important to you to be the kind of dad that you want to be are not compatible with the life that you're living right now.
yeah.
Um, and that was a hard truth.
Yeah. Um, let's keep moving into your second pivot from head of podcast at Sports Illustrated to product managing, product marketing, the software, the world of software, which is pretty different. Um, Talk about what that pivot looked like, and how you then, I guess, transferred your skills from both the world of TV and podcasts into this new thing. Why did you choose software? Kind of give it all.
Um, so I knew people who were working in tech um, for a while. My brother is an engineer, and my wife, after she stopped doing her calligraphy business, like she had been a graphic designer for a long time. That sort of became being a UX designer. Um, and So I knew a bunch of people who had worked with product managers. And when I heard them, whenever they would talk to me about product management and like what product managers did, it sounded an awful lot like what I did um, as a producer, as an executive producer in podcasting, just sort of in a different context. It was a lot of the same. It felt like a lot of the same soft skills. And and some people had told me like, yeah, I think you'd actually be really good at this. So that was kind of in the back of my head for a while. Uh, I had also gotten the chance to work with some of the product team at Sports Illustrated, some engineers and their head of product and um, and designers, and I really liked those people, and I liked the way that I saw their team working, and I liked when I got to work with them, and you know, so that was in my head too, um, and it became clear to me at a certain point that I had gone probably about as high as I could go in podcasting. I'd pretty quickly gone from producer to senior producer to executive producer, and I was like running podcasts at a admittedly not like top tier network, but like for a major like recognizable household name media brand. Like I wasn't going to go much higher. And when I kind of looked around at what the jobs were that I would want next in podcasting, I could probably count them on one hand, and there were probably like 50 qualified people, 100 qualified people for like four jobs that were out there in the world. It's just like, this is just, it just felt like a very sort of contracting upward trajectory. It felt like I was kind of at the ceiling. And it started to feel like podcasting was really in a bubble. There's all this money that had been pumped into it, and then everybody that had been pumping all this money in kind of started to realize like, oh, hey, this business model is not like fundamentally sound. And it was like at a certain point they're gonna start expecting this investment to pay off, and I don't think it's going to, because I don't think that they went in with their eyes open. um that turned out to be true. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back too much, but like it was a bubble. It did burst, and yeah, I'm glad that I was out by the time that happened. Um, so I Yeah, I had been looking to leave Sports Illustrated. I wanted to move up. I wasn't gonna. There was nowhere to go there. I wanted to go other places. Uh, I had had a couple interviews that were interesting, but nothing came to fruition. So I decided to take a general assembly class in product management. Um, kind of similar to when I had taken the writing class. It was like, I think that I understand basically how this works, but I want the language, I want the tools. I want to understand more of just like how an insider would talk about this. And that was really useful. That was a good sort of like dipping my toe in. It was absolutely not enough on its own um, to get me a job, although it almost did, because I was in a couple final round interviews. After going through that whole class, I started applying to jobs and made up my resume, to position myself as a product manager. Got into final round interviews with a couple companies. And I also we were pregnant with our second kid at that point. And, um, Sports Illustrated was a deeply flawed company with many, many problems. But one thing that they did right was that they had really good paternity leave.
Mm.
And, and I realized that I got deep enough in interviews that I, was finding out what the paternity leave policies were at the companies I was interviewing with, and none of them were particularly good. The best one was like half of what I was going to get at Sports Illustrated. So I was like, all right, I'll just, I'm going to pump the brakes on this, um, and uh, and take my paternity leave, and then after I come back from paternity leave, um, I'll start looking again. Um, and then 2 months into my paternity leave, uh, or a month and a half or something, I got laid off. My entire department got cut, and um, along with a bunch of other stuff. And it was it was one of many rounds of layoffs that Sports Illustrated did before the company eventually changed hands. In scandal and disarray, and no love lost there. Uh, and and then also like the job market collapsed. And so this was like what, a couple of years ago now. So I was unemployed for a while, and but I was still, committed to wanting to make the change and wanting to make the pivot into being a product manager. I was able to start picking up a couple of contract gigs. Some of them paid, some of them not, and just sort of like, hey, I'm gonna do this as a favor to get experience for myself.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm sure everyone's curious to know, how do you get those first opportunities, even those first contract jobs?
um, let's see. So there were a couple other things that happened. One was based on the advice of the former head of product at Sports Illustrated. I went and got a Scrum certification. So I was a certified Scrum Master. So that was just another sort of thing to kind of show people like, hey, I don't have a lot of experience, but I have this certification. So like, I do know what I'm doing to a certain extent. Um, I also was trying to network like crazy, just like any connection that I could form with anybody that I knew, friends of friends of friends, colleagues of former colleagues. Um,
Primarily on like LinkedIn or
yes, I mean, somewhat through LinkedIn, somewhat through just like actual personal connections, right? Like I, I hit up the guy who was the former head of product at Sports Illustrated, and I was like, hey, do you know anybody who you think might be interested in talking to me just so I can like learn more about how this works at certain companies? It, I can talk more about this later, but like, if you just want to know, if you're not asking for a favor and you just want to know about somebody and just want to know about what they do and you're curious about their company and you're curious about what their day to day looks like, people are pretty willing to talk to you, right?
yeah.
I learned in business school that this is called an informational interview. um, so people are very willing to do these informational interviews with you. People like kind of talking about themselves, and it's a good way to learn a lot. It's a good way to get to know people. And if at the end, if you can just say, hey, I'm interested to learn more, like, is there anybody else you would be willing to connect me with? Or, hey, you were able to speak about this one part of the company, but I'm actually pretty curious about how this other part of the company works. Do you know anybody over there you might be able to connect me with? So that works pretty well. Not every time, but that works pretty well. And so I got a bunch of connections through that. Um, Also, like, there was a guy who was a head of product at A&E Networks who I had never met when I worked there, but I messaged him on LinkedIn. It's just like, hey, I used to work at A&E. I know such and such. I'm interested in this now. Like, would you be willing to chat with me? Right. And pre-pandemic days, you would have been offering to buy people coffee, which they may or may not have done, but now you can hop on a video call with someone and it's pretty easy. Um, it's not easy. It's hard. It takes a lot of effort, but in terms of just like compared to having to coordinate a schedule to meet someone in person for a cup of coffee, it's easy for people to be able to hop on a Zoom call. Um, uh, there's also a bunch of like um, honestly groups like this, like Slack groups, right? And I got
The
connected
plug.
with.
I appreciate the plug. Thank you.
Well, no, I mean, I got connected with a couple different Slack groups, and um, a couple of the contract gigs that I had, especially the non-paying ones, were the result of either someone messaging me or me messaging someone else on one of those Slack groups, and just us talking about something that was kind of an interesting problem, and that I was willing to help out for not any money on a kind of a limited scope kind of basis, and that
Yeah.
was enough to be able to put on my resume such that I could felt like I could keep applying for jobs. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how I got those first couple contract gigs. Just a
And
little
now
bit
you're
of resume filler.
working full time. Um, you're working full time at over the top marketing.
Yeah.
How did you find it? How did you find that job search? Finding a full time job based on, I guess, relatively limited like contract roles that you had done.
So along the way, while I was doing contract roles, I also was trying to pick up contract work for podcasting because I needed money. And I had that as a skill set, and I was like, well, I'll do whatever I can to make money at this point. And so I'd done a couple of those, and I got connected with Over the Top actually um, for a podcast gig um, because they wanted to make a podcast. And that kicked off a series of conversations that was a back and forth that went on for months. Actually, at one point, like I thought that the CEO who was supposed to host the podcast, I thought sounded like too much of a nutcase and not worth my time. And I told them, like, forget it, I'm not going to do this. And then they started pursuing me a lot harder because they really liked me. And so they really like wanted me to produce this podcast. So anyway, over a series of conversations, like uh, they the CEO found out that I was um, also getting my MBA and uh, also had some experience as a product manager. I found out that they weren't just a marketing agency looking to make a podcast. They also were a marketing tech company who had made their own software and that they actually really needed product help. And that kind of spurred this conversation that led to them hiring me on in a full-time role to I was initially hired as a product marketer, which was a role that we kind of made up, like me and the CEO, which was our way of kind of saying like, hey, I'm going to do some marketing for the company and make this podcast and do some other things and also help out on the product side and help with strategy and all of that. Within a month, maybe 2 months of my working there, it became clear that like no one was listening to the podcast or watching it. It was video. It was literally like nobody, um, which I tried to tell them was going to happen, but they didn't listen. I wanted to do it anyway, and I was like, okay, this is what you're paying me to do, so I'll do it. So nobody was doing that. So that was not a super high value use of anybody's time. And their needs for product management were so great that they ended up like fully shifting me into that role. And
Yeah.
we basically just dropped marketing from my title. And so yeah, I'm a,
Um, we're at the 45-minute mark, so I want to kind of keep things moving.
yeah.
Um, Kind of big picture questions here. What's it like on the other side from entertainment? What do you enjoy? What do you miss? And then if you can somehow wrap this into there as well, what are the big misconceptions about pivoting or your new career, what you do? I know it's a lot of questions, so let me know if you want any of them again.
So what is it like? Um, my first real, I think like yeah, so there were sort of two tiers of exit for me, right? There was sort of like working in podcasting, which is not film and television and that very specific world, but still kind of within the entertainment industry writ large. And then there was like, I'm fully out. Like I'm working in a tech role for a marketing company like that has nothing to do with film and television and entertainment really in any way. Um, so it's sort of progressing along those two tiers. It's increasingly like, frankly, just really refreshing. Um, I don't feel it as much anymore because I'm a little more used to it. But like, especially in the beginning, as I was working in podcasting, like feeling like the work that I was doing had value, feeling like the people that I was interacting with on a day to day basis actually respected me, made me realize the degree to which I did not have those things before,
Mm.
and that was, um, you know, both refreshing and disheartening because it was like, oh, I have been working for a decade of my career and have not really been in a position where I've actually like felt respected or valued, and that really sucks. Um, and uh, yeah, and then just like a bunch of the stuff that you just get really used to in film and television that like once you're outside of it, you're like, oh, this doesn't make any sense that like people that they do things this way. There's a
Yeah.
lot of things done a certain way because of inertia or like this concept of people having to come up through ranks or pay their dues or just all kinds of BS like that like doesn't really exist outside of the entertainment business. The whole sort of like assistant culture doesn't really exist outside of the entertainment business other than like in really specific ways, but even in the places where there are assistants like executive assistants and legal assistants, like it's still not the frankly like abusive situation that is just commonplace in the entertainment business. Um, the closest thing I've seen is in sports where they, it's such a highly competitive, business where so many people want to work in sports and in all its different capacities that they can kind of afford to like put people into these kind of very menial roles and make them pay their dues. But even there, like there are paths to move up. So um, yeah, that was the thing that was really sort of most revelatory and great was just like, oh yeah, you can actually like work hard and do a great job and be rewarded for that success, and then have people respect you and have people value the work that you're doing and work regular sane hours and get benefits and all those kinds of things. And like I kind of, when I was 20, I thought that would make me feel really bad, but it actually felt really good. So
How novel.
yeah. And
Um,
so that, well, I don't know what the other 17 questions you asked me were.
the other 12 questions. What do you miss? What kind of stirs your heartstrings from the days of yore working in entertainment?
Um, I do miss the kind of like daily chaos of it, right? Just that like every day is different and kind of anything could happen. And there are sort of these periods of kind of wonderful downtime of just like bonding with the other people that you're working with, and sometimes bonding through like trauma, but also bonding. Um, and you know, the long, brutal hours are really awful. And then also at the same time, like you're all kind of going through that together. And it's just sort of this, I don't know, it's a kind of singular experience.
Trench warfare,
And
sort of.
I've always been really enamored by the magic of like walking around a studio a lot. Um, and I'm like, as much as I do feel like I stayed in the business in assistant roles for too long, I'm so grateful that I got to have some of the experiences that I had, particularly when I got to work I worked on almost every major studio lot, and just walking around those lots and seeing everything going on, and you know, just just all this sort of activity, the hustle and bustle, peeking into different sound stages and seeing what's happening. It's like that. There really, I mean, there is a magic to it, and it that magic never really went away for me. Like I always felt that even in the end.
Yeah. Um, Question number 8. Uh, what are the misconceptions surrounding pivoting or surrounding the career that you're in? What are the things that people get wrong about the process?
I touched on some of it earlier, but like there's a lot of mental gymnastics that you have to go through when you are making that move, to kind of not like beyond even convincing anybody else, convincing yourself that you are making a choice that is okay to make, and that like you just don't judge yourself for. Um, and uh, and then sort of like just figuring out how to translate your skills. This is probably the hardest part, is figuring out how to 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 translate both your skills and your interests, right?
Yeah.
Understanding like what what you are qualified to do, um, and what you actually want to do. And like you, like when you spend enough time in a certain field in a certain industry, like you don't really have a good understanding of what's going on, especially because the entertainment business is pretty unique in the way that it functions. You don't necessarily feel like you have this great picture of how other industries, other businesses, other fields work.
Yeah.
So kind of getting over that knowledge gap is challenging, and figuring out what that means to you personally, to like, I know that I liked this aspect of the work that I've been doing, or I know that I always have wanted to do this kind of thing. How do I figure out where to do that, or what is the way to um, translate that into some other field? And a lot of the ideas that other people might have when you have these conversations are not all that helpful. So being
Mm.
able to kind of filter some of that out, um, that like, you know, I had a lot of people tell me like, oh, you should do like marketing copywriting. And I'm like, I would shoot myself in the head. Like that sounds awful. I do not want to do that. So yeah.
That is the hardest part, is that I've realized as well, as filtering that information. Um,
But I will like, I want to add just a little bit to that, which is like, there are so many soft skills that you learn working in, honestly, any aspect of film and television. I know the knowledge can feel really specific, but it does translate and it does come in handy, even if you don't know kind of in the moment of transition how it's going to. Like a lot of it is super valuable. Hard skills are hard skills, right? Like you can learn hard skills. That stuff is learnable. Um, and you know, it, like some of the things that I did in terms of like taking classes, I dragged my feet for months or years before actually pulling the trigger on doing it, because I didn't want to make the financial commitment, or I didn't want to make the time commitment, because I wanted something to happen faster. But in reality, if I had just gone for it sooner, I would have been way better off. Like I'm getting my MBA right now. I first had the idea to get my MBA in 2017, but I didn't want to make the financial commitment or the time commitment. Well, I could have had my MBA three times over by now.
yeah.
Like, but I just that's hard to see. That's hard to see in the moment.
I, I guess any other, I mean, I was going to ask the same kind of question, knowing what you know now, like what changes would you have made? What actions would you have taken differently than how you approached him before?
I definitely would have. There was a specific moment and a specific conversation that my wife and I had in 2015 that I remember the conversation exactly. And we were like this close to saying like F it all and moving from California to New York and like pivoting careers and just like throwing it all away. And we didn't do it. But ultimately that's what we did. It just took
Hmm.
us another 2 years to do that. And so it's
Yeah.
like I wish at that moment in time we had done the thing we were talking about doing, and that it took us another 2 years to end up doing.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess like broadly, it's like don't don't wait would be my advice. Like don't wait to do a thing that you've been thinking for a long time about doing. Um, and don't be afraid to make a real investment, and not like a half-assed investment, like a real investment, right? Like, we know some people who have gone to like coding boot camps and stuff, and that has paid off like crazy. And like,
Yeah.
you know, the general assembly class that I took, that was like I don't know, like a 6 week class or something. That was a little bit of a half-ass, right? Like if I had, again, in 2014, 2015, I had the idea to try to teach myself to code, and I was trying to do just like, I don't know, what's the like free online coding school, um, whatever, one of those free online coding schools, and I gave it up after a couple months. If I had just actually like made a real investment and just been like, I'm going to do a coding boot camp and I'm going to learn how to do this,
Yeah.
um, I would have been much better off. Not that I want to be an engineer, but I probably would have found my way into product management from that.
Yeah.
And Yeah, those are, I just, I where I got to was so much better than where than where I was. I wish I had gone there. I wish I had done it sooner and done it faster.
Um, any we're going to take some questions if there are any. We'll take some questions from the group in just a moment. But I guess any closing pieces of advice to people considering pivoting, and also to people who maybe don't think that they're capable of doing it. Because I've gotten a lot of that recently talking to people. Something that's come up over and over again. People, I don't know what I'm good at. I don't know where my skills are. I don't know what else I would do. I don't know what else I would be good at, or I don't know what else I would like. What would you say to them?
Um, I would say don't be afraid to try some stuff because like these decisions can feel so big to us, and they are so big, especially when you're making a sort of career pivot decision. And they feel really big in the moment that you're making the decision, but like it's easy to forget that none of these decisions have to be permanent. And it's not like, I mean, I think you know, this has kind of come up in the in the course of like my story in a couple different ways, but like my pivots were not pivots. They were sort of like these tectonic gradual shifts, right? Like it took a long time for me to be fully doing one thing and not doing the previous thing. There was always this overlap where I was looking for a product job, but still also taking podcast jobs, or I was doing a podcast job, but still also doing this other business on the side. And then ultimately still ended up taking a TV job that then turned into a podcast job. So it's just like, there's going to be kind of potentially multiple things that can happen at the same time. And also, like, if you try something and don't like it, you don't have to keep doing it. You can keep pivoting. The pivot can keep going, right? You can go back to what you were doing before, or you can try something else, try something else, try something else, try something else, right? Like there's a lot out there. There's probably way more out there than you can possibly imagine. And like be open to making big changes, because like you absolutely can make big changes. Um, I I'm getting my MBA, but I'm not in a traditional MBA program. I'm in an executive MBA program. The average age in the program is 39. There are people in this program who are in their 60s and have decided they either want to do something different or want a new skill set or whatever, but they're making the investment to do something different, to have a new skill set, to have new knowledge, to be able to continue to grow and change in their careers. Like it is, I won't say it's never too late. There is a point in which it is probably too late, but like that point comes, I think, way later than a lot of us think it does.
Yeah. Um, Terrific. Thank you for surviving the gauntlet, Scott. We've got a couple questions from the group. Um, First one's from Kyle. Do you recall any of the details of that first interview at A&E in terms of, I guess, what aspects of your experience you highlighted? Maybe just beyond storytelling, did it feel like an uphill battle trying to convince them that you had a transferable skill set from your time in TV? It's a good question, Kyle. Thanks.
That one was tricky, because um, the role was not super clearly defined. Uh, so yeah, I mean, I did emphasize my storytelling a lot, but I also emphasized um, my kind of industry knowledge and experience in that. And I'll say like there's a certain amount of BSing that has to happen, right? Um, when I was work when I was making that transition before I got the job at A&E, um, I had I had some stuff on my resume about being a creative development executive at a production company that was essentially this is going to get posted online.
It's gonna get posted online, my friend. We can cut around it though if you really don't, if you're not comfortable sharing this
No, it's all right. It's okay.
factoid.
It was a long time ago. Uh, it was uh, it was like one of my former bosses like loan out companies, right? And it wasn't completely made up. Like it wasn't a total fabrication, but it wasn't like I was going into an office every day and doing development work. It was like, I was giving him notes on his scripts. I was helping him prepare pitches. Like I was doing some of the stuff, but this was not what I, it was not, it was inflated on my resume, right? It was like, and he was, it was like with his permission, we had a good relationship, and he was like, I have no problem with you doing this. If you ever call me, if anyone ever calls me for a reference, like I will, I'll sing your praises. Um, so definitely helpful to have people who are advocates in that way and understand what you're trying to do. But like, yeah, I mean, it helps to be able to inflate certain things. That said, like a couple of my kind of key pivoting roles, I don't think were really based on any specific experience that I highlighted. I think they were
Yeah.
more based on just me. Just like I just connected with the person, and they liked me, and they felt like I had a broad skill set and an intellectual curiosity and other kinds of soft skills that they felt like I would be um, an attribute to the organization, right? And so like that happened at A&E, where they basically made up a role for me, and then I had to figure out what it was going to be and turn it into something else. That happened at the job that I'm at now at Over the Top, where the CEO made up a job for me, and then it turned into something else. So I don't know. It's not a super direct answer to that question, but
No, I guess it's a lesson in flexibility and your willingness to um I guess just be flexible with how, like, the job title that you sign up for isn't necessarily the only thing that you're going to be doing at a job. Like, people are used to that. In a writer's assistant role, you're a writer's assistant and sometimes you pitch and whatever. But like, yeah,
I have been guilty of being highly cynical at certain points in my journey. Uh, and and I do wish that I could go back and get myself to dial that down,
yeah,
because um it actually was like sort of weirdly egotistic for me to be that way. Is like to think that I know how things are going to play out, or to think that I know what situation I'm actually in. There have been so many situations where um, a relationship that I never thought would turn into anything useful, and I might have even written off, turned it. I mean, like I said, this the guy that's my boss now.
yeah.
I tried to not work for. I said no thanks. This guy's a maniac. I don't need to work for this guy. And he ended and now like we have this great relationship. He's my boss. So like you never know where these things are going to go, and so you have to stay open minded. You have to stay open to the universe providing you with some of these paths and possibilities that you just are not going to be able to see very far down the road for a while. But like don't assume too much that you know where any particular interaction or relationship or opportunity is going to take you.
Yeah, that's great. Got a question from Christina. Speaking about project management, is it helpful to take an online certificate through extension programs a lot of jobs applied for ask if I have a certification from anywhere, and I heard that's a plus. Is that something that you think about?
So I want to make the distinction between project management and product management. I am a software product manager. So I work directly with software engineers and UX designers and a bunch of other stakeholders within the company to make software products. What I do is more about like understanding user needs and problems. It's a lot of prioritization and strategy. There are some tactical elements in terms of just like what's going to get worked on when and how, but it's more strategic, less tactical.
Right.
Project management is much more tactical. Project management is really about like is much closer to like line producing or production management, right? Where it's like I'm the
That kind
person
of
who keeps the trains running on time. Here's the schedule, here's the order of things, here's when things are due. Like
yeah.
you're following up on all of that, right? And if you have that skill set and you like doing that kind of work, like project management can be great. And that exists in some places in tech and but it exists in a lot of industries that can be a really broad skill set. I think that there are certifications for project management that are useful. I don't know what they are.
Um,
So
that kind of ties
yeah.
into another question about that was asked by C, who asked if think you think it's easier for someone who's coming from production to pursue project or product management. Um, and product managers seem to include knowledge of UX and UI design, which is something that, yeah, I, I would agree with that aspect of it.
Um, Product management is has become a lot tougher to get into. I would say like um, you picking up enough of the early gigs. I think like what actually ended up helping me was that I was able to kind of position myself to be able to um, get enough experience and properly leverage my my other not necessarily tech experience to be able to come into it at a level that was not a sort of like intro like entry level um, because I think the entry level jobs in product management are kind of going away, at least more in like big tech,
Yeah.
because there's just been a lot of consolidation in big tech and a lot of layoffs. And so, more sort of like what you think of when you think of tech. Um, I think it's a lot harder to get jobs now than it was, you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago. But there are also a lot of like subdivisions of tech that are really booming right now, even when everybody is like saying doom and gloom about tech. Um, like med tech, like health tech and med tech, super booming. Biotech requires a certain specific knowledge, but booming. Um, Fintech, financial tech, booming. So like if you have interest in doing that, those might be easier to find your way into. Um, uh, I don't know. I would tend to say like they're pretty different and project management or product management. And so I would say pursue whichever one you think sounds more interesting. Like try to make it work. They're I don't think they're really the same skill set. One is a lot more um, tactical and execution based, and the other one is a lot more sort of I don't know, strategic and curiosity based. It's a lot more about just like asking a ton of questions.
Yeah, there's a lot of research that goes into product management, and you know, it goes into determining what the thing is to build and who the customers are and all that. Um, we have a question here about, I think this is the second to last one. Um, Question here. If you've primarily worked production as a crew member, including team leader with a producer title, translating your everyday work into something that sounds impactful or even quantifiable is difficult. Any suggestions with the resume process? Feels like every line item is inflated BS when I think about the actual everyday duties, and that seems right to me.
But man, resumes are tough. Resumes are tough, especially right now. Like, um, I would say you're on the right. You definitely have the right mindset in terms of asking the question that you're asking, and thinking about things like impactful and quantifiable, because I do think, especially in the world that I'm in now, and like tech, like being able to tie the things that you're doing to moving specific performance metrics, like showing like, hey, here's what I did, here's how it impacted the business, um, are very good things to be able to do. In terms of like, yeah, crew experience, I don't know. I mean, you can talk about like how many people were on the team that you led, and how you worked to increase meeting efficiency. And I wouldn't make up like BS statistics, but the thing is like, outside of the entertainment business, and even just like the world of production, nobody knows anything about what you do. Like, it is a complete mystery. So you can say
Black
whatever you want,
box. Yeah.
right? Like, for better and worse, So you do have to translate that experience into something that is going to feel more universal. But you also get to translate that experience into something that feels more universal. Like, it's a challenge, but it's also a huge benefit. Like, you are not constrained by um, like the particularities of anybody being able to call out, what you're saying on your resume is not making sense, right? That they're just not
Who are they
going
going
to.
to call?
They
Who are
they
they going
don't.
to talk to?
Who are they going to call? Um, and also, like, people generally just kind of take you. I mean, look, there's a certain level of BS on a resume that you read and you just go like, this is complete crap.
Yeah.
But if this is grounded in reality, and you're just trying to like tell a story that's going to make sense to people, um, I think that's very doable. I know that's probably not that helpful of advice, but
Well, I will say, see, we are going to have someone who's a specialist in building resumes,
oh,
especially
cool, that's cool.
people
Yeah,
to coming to do one of our webinars, and helping people kind of translate those skills. So that's coming up in a future webinar, in not too
I
long.
would say, do one thing that I've learned, and I don't know how much better it's gotten. Do not let ChatGPT write your resume. It will make up stuff. It will make like, not just like inflate your like make your job sound inflated. It will like actually just like make up jobs that you didn't have.
Yep.
So don't let ChatGPT. And also, like, anybody who's using any kind of automated resume processing thing, they now all have like AI detection built into it, which, like, I don't know exactly how it works, but it does work decently well. So just, I just wouldn't do it.
Um, Sorry, there are two more questions. What are some key things to highlight in cover letters? That's asked by Christina.
Hmm. Um,
I've been doing a lot of cover letters recently, so I might actually be able to field this one. Scott, I've been applying to a number of jobs. I think,
well, you can feel it from a writing perspective, and I'll feel it from a reading perspective, because I have read a lot of cover letters because I've done a decent amount of hiring in my, especially in my podcast roles. But
Your
go
opinion's
for
more valid here. I'm gonna let you start
it.
in that case.
um, it's helpful if you can use the cover letter to um, tell a story or highlight an experience that like is not clear from just looking at your resume, right? If you can add specific context to something, or um, the two things that have stood out to me when I've read cover letters are like when you're using it to tell me like in a sort of more zoomed in way what you actually did, right? Like, because just looking at someone's resume and saying like, oh, I worked on this show, I was part of this team, whatever. I don't know. I don't like, okay, we moved this metric. Okay. We had this amount of like podcast listeners. Okay. But like, what did you do? Right. Um, and I think when you're applying for jobs, it's easy to forget that like that's not necessarily clear to the person who's looking at your application, like what you actually did on any given in any given job or on any given project. Um, so if you can make that clearer in the course of your cover letter, that's great. Um, Also, very impactful can be if you are using it to paint a clearer picture of um, who you are in terms of your like core values and what you believe and why you are trying to do what you're trying to do. Because then someone may have a chance of being able to assess you as like, I think this person might be a really good fit for the company, or I think this person might not be a good fit for the company. And they might make that assessment regardless of whatever your resume says, right? Um, and that goes both ways. You might be super qualified on in your resume to do a job, and then if they see in your cover letter, you know what, this person is not really a culture fit, like they value things that are not in line with what the values of the company are, then great, like you're not going to waste your time, which I know is a hard thing to sort of wrap your head around as being acceptable when you're in the position of looking for a job and you're feeling kind of desperate, but it is ultimately good. um, yeah, and then vice versa. Like you know, you might be underqualified for a job, but still get pulled in because you are able to show that like that you get it, that you get what the company is trying to do, you get it from a culture and values perspective.
Great. Um, One last question. Um, do you write on the side, or do you have a creative outlet of your own?
Right
And
on
you
the
can
side, do I have a creative outlet?
interpret creative outlet however you wish to interpret creative outlet.
I do not. Um, I realized at a certain point for me that I didn't really like the act of writing all that much. I really liked um, I really liked editing. I liked editing other people's work um, and running with other people's ideas, like um, trying to iterate, trying to improve on things, asking questions, trying to help other people get there. I like the collaborative process. I liked having written something in the sense of accomplishment, but I really didn't like the actual work of just like sitting down and typing out my thoughts. And I just, and I like some of the like story breaking work. I find that to be interesting and satisfying, but yeah, finishing scripts was always a challenge for me, just because I just didn't love that part of the work. Um, and there are people who do, but I was not one of them. Um, I don't really have time for a creative outlet otherwise because I have two small kids, and I'm in school and working a full-time job, and I have a startup that I sometimes spend some hours on, John.
Good answer. That's it for questions. We did get one question basically asking if it would be okay to send a question later if it comes up and ping me,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I'm
of course.
sure I can pass it on, whatever.
Yep.
Um, but thank you so much. Scott, I'm gonna
Can
stop.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We're gonna like well, I'll just say like if anybody wants to hang out and chat for another minute, or we don't have to record this part. Um, uh, or like hit me up afterwards and talk to me about like specifically where they're at in their career. Like I'm happy to chat more about that too, because I don't know. I always think it's interesting to like hear where people are at kind of in their journeys with this. Um, everyone's everyone's path is so specific. I mean, this is like having these kinds of conversations is really hard because like a lot of like my journey is not replicable, right? Like and really nobody's is. So I can't really like tell you what to do. I can tell you what I did and what worked for me and what didn't work for me. But like those so many of those things are really specific to me and my circumstances. Um but I still think it's interesting to like hear where people are at. So anyway, I don't know.
Well, I'll pass on, if it's okay with you, email information for the folks who attended this event at least, so that, you get a reward for joining. I'm gonna stop recording though. Thank you very much, Scott, for joining. Thank you everyone for attending. This was I would say a worthy first effort. And yeah, have a wonderful night, everyone. This has been great. And thank you again, Scott, for spending an hour and a half talking us through stuff.
Cool. Yeah, no problem. Happy to help.